All right. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the San Anselmo Library's virtual program today, starting and maintaining an Espalier tree. I'm Sarah Yana, the Adult Services Librarian at the San Anselmo Library. And before we begin, I'd like to thank the Friends of the Library and the Library Parcels Tax for sponsoring this program and all library programs. Technology can be very fickle, and I want to thank you all in advance for your patience and understanding during this program. We will be recording this program today, and I will send the recording out to everybody later tomorrow. Everyone will remain muted until the end of the presentation. If you have a question, please type it into the chat, into the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. We will be answering all questions at the end of the presentation. Our speakers today are Janice Rosales and Dana Tamura. Janice has been a UC Marin Master Gardener since 2016, and she has been a member of the Pruning Guild since 2017. Janice has taken pruning classes at Marin College and has volunteered at the Edible Demonstration Garden at Indian Valley Organic Farming Garden. Dana Tamura has been a UC Marin Master Gardener and member of the Pruning Guild since 2017, where she is a journeyman pruner. Over the past 20 years, she has studied horticulture and landscape design at Merritt College, Foothill College, and UC Berkeley Extension. She sustains her pruning passion with 4 Espalier fruiting trees she has squeezed into her small Novato garden. Please join me in welcoming Janice and Dana. Yay!
Hi, everyone. I'm Dana.
Hi, I'm Janice.
So what we are going to do is show you a PowerPoint presentation that we put together on how to do espaliers, and you're welcome to send along some questions during the presentation if you like, using the Q&A, and at the end we will try and answer as many as we can. We do have a bit of a time limit. We'll be finishing up at 2 on the dot, so we'll squeeze in as much as we can between now and then. Do you have anything to add, Janice?
No, I hope you all enjoyed the presentation as much as we enjoy gardening.
Yes. Maybe we'll get some converts. Oops. That's the Q&A. Just pull that up. So right now I'm just setting it up so that I can share the PowerPoint. And here we go. Sorry, hang on a sec. Welcome, fellow plant people. Janice and I, and this is Dana speaking now, are Marin Master Gardeners, which is the volunteer program offered through the University of California Cooperative Extension. The purpose of Master Gardeners is to provide the public with education and information regarding how to incorporate appropriate horticulture techniques while working with plants, the soil, and irrigation in your gardens. So what is espalier, and why and how would we use it? Well, we consider it an art form, amongst other things. You can grow beautiful sculptured plants that will fit into a much smaller space. Industry uses it on a large scale and considers espalier to be an economical form of growing more fruit in less space with more ease in dealing with pests, diseases, and harvesting. We'll be covering the different patterns traditional to espalier, the pros and cons of espalier, how to manage actually growing, training, and pruning espalier fruit trees. Shown here are a few examples from the River Road Farms in Tennessee that specializes in espalier fruit trees. Espalier is the ancient, beginning with the Romans and refined by Europe in the 1500s, and all but forgotten art of training fruit and ornamental trees to grow flat against a wall, fence, archway, or other two-dimensional surface, creating a living sculpture. Here are a couple of examples. This crisscross style is called a Belgian fence pattern. It can be used to create a living fence, as you see in the image on the right behind the blue bench, or as a decoration for a wall, as you see on the left. The image on the left shows a cordon-style espalier against a wall. Think long cord. The image on the right is a three-tier palmette verrier style. Both are very traditional espalier patterns. Espaliered apple trees were used here to make a living tunnel or entry archway. And here, and in the next photo, you can see espalier in use as a living fence. Again, you see both the Belgian fence style in use here, and here you see the candelabra style, which is very similar to the palmette verrier style you saw earlier. All three styles make a very interesting living fence and are used here and there. Espalier is used quite often to decorate buildings while saving space and hopefully creating a mini orchard at the same time. This style is a natural fan shape, which is one of the easiest espalier patterns to create. And this building is being decorated using the candelabra pattern. And espalier is used to make beautiful spaces. This particular space happens to be a wedding venue. Those of you that live in California will recognize this. Now, we're not recommending this particular treatment of plants, but these are interesting. These trees were shaped by Axel Erlandson sometime in the mid-1940s. In 1985, they were moved to the Gilroy Gardens, where you can still see them. As you can see here, an espalier plant has a narrow canopy. Note how the sun is able to really penetrate the plant and gets into the branches, shines on all the leaves and all the fruit quite easily with greater sun coverage. They're a great decorative addition to a garden with limited space, as you can squeeze quite a few of them in since they don't take up much room. They can hide less than attractive walls or fences. There's an ease in managing their growth and structure and in harvesting the fruit. You can grow several cultivars on one plant if you're interested in grafting. Heat from the walls radiate back into the plant during the winter, providing more heat and frost protection is particularly helpful with citrus plants. It's easier to see and manage pests. And of course, you can feed your garden artistry urge to your heart's content. They can keep you quite busy. It's much easier to protect against pests on a espalier plant because it's just easier to get into the plant itself. The fruit is easier to find and remove, and if you need to, there's better spray coverage should you want to use horticultural oil during the dormant season. The fruit may be easier to protect and keep dry because you can throw a piece of plastic or netting over the very thin canopy of the plant, and it works pretty well. There are a number of pests that can attack your fruit trees, including the codling moth and the citrus psyllid, shown here. Horticulture oil, when mixed with water and sprayed on trees during the dormant season, will smother overwintering insects and their eggs. it targets mites, aphids, codling moth, leafhoppers, mealybugs, leaf miners, and more. This is one of many techniques that can be used as a control. Beneficial insects are rarely around trees in the dormant season, so if you must spray, the dormant season is the time to do it. You can see how harvesting and checking for pest damage might be a bit easier on an espalier fruiting plant. You can reach right in and eliminate some pests by hand. It's also easier to get any spray into the interior of the plants if need be. And when it comes time to harvest, the fruit is unobstructed and within reach. There is a wealth of information about management of plant diseases at your local Master Gardener's website. Here are a couple of common problems and suggested fixes. Peach leaf curl can be managed with lime sulfur, a fungicide that controls fungal diseases like apple and pear scab and peach leaf curl. Copper is a fungicide and bactericide that helps control diseases like bacterial canker and fire blight. You can get fairly good spray coverage with these mixes on an espalier plant during the winter months. Two of the many reasons espalier helps with pest management are shown here. It's relatively easy to cover an espalier plant with a plastic tarp for a period of time or to cover with netting while a particular pest is active. To protect against brown rot and peach leaf curl, for example, tarping just before heavy rains can help with these problems. And netting can be used to protect against birds, squirrels, rodents, and such. There are a few disadvantages to espalier training and growing. As you've seen from some of the images, espalier plants have a narrower canopy, which is great for getting sunlight in, but can also cause sunburn and borers in the burnt areas of the plant. There's a learning curve to creating an espalier tree or shrub, which can be really interesting and a bit challenging initially. It requires increased management in spring and midsummer when there is some necessary pruning involved. And not all species or varieties work well with espalier. Some are so vigorous that it's impossible to keep them in check, and they're better left to grow in their own natural forms. Some fruit species don't work as well with espalier because they fruit on new wood only. More on this to come. Before we move on, let me give you a refresher on some of the popular styles of espalier, because I'll be referring to them later. On the upper left is the horizontal cordon style. The upper right is Palmette Verrier, which is sometimes confused with candelabra, which is in the middle. On the lower left, you see the informal fan shape, which is the easiest to create. And on the right is the Belgian fence. One of the most common choices for espalier are apple tree varieties, as apple trees tend to be relatively easy to train. They're used for a number of different patterns. Horizontal espalier, the cordon style, is the easiest, but fan, palmetto, candelabra, or Belgian fence are also popular. Pears are much like apples and treated similarly because both pear and apple trees fruit on spurs along the branches rather than on branch tips, which we'll show examples of later. Citrus fruit trees like orange, lemon, kumquat, or pomelo can be done, but espalier citrus trees tend to prefer more informal designs. They do well as a horizontal, but natural or fan shapes are a much easier form in which to train citrus. Plums and apricots both seem to do best as a fan shape, but can be trained into low horizontal hedge as well. Both of these need more attention than some other varieties, as they tend to send off lots of young shoots, which means more frequent pruning. Espalier pomegranate trees do quite well in natural espalier form rather than formal, which means they're trained against a flat surface. but not in any particular pattern, as do some varieties of persimmon. Peaches and nectarines only produce fruit on new wood, which means that they're going to require a lot more pruning to encourage flushes of new growth. These should be pruned in an informal fan shape to provide room for the young fruiting branches to grow. Espalier fig trees are also popular for the horizontal method, although as fig trees become quite large, they're more commonly trained to an informal fan pattern, which is a little bit easier to do. I mentioned in the last slide that apple trees and pear trees are fairly easy to espalier because they have fruiting spurs along their branches. These fruiting spurs grow close to the branches and fruit from year to year. So when you're pruning, look to preserve these swollen appearing fruit spurs because otherwise you won't get any fruit. Peaches and nectarines only produce fruit on new wood, which means that they're going to require a lot more pruning to encourage flushes of new growth, and they are best grown in a fan shape to provide room for the young new branches to form. Typically, peach trees should be pruned by February as they begin to bloom in early March. Wait just long enough that the last of the spring frosts are over and then prune. Many types of stone fruit are tip fruiting, meaning that only the tips of the branches produce the fruit. This is the case with persimmons. With these, you'll need to have more offshoot branches to produce more tips that can bear fruit than you would with other varieties. Because the fruit is borne near the ends of the branches on buds that began to form the previous year, you don't usually want to cut off the branch tips. And fig trees get very large. So although you can espalier them, you're going to have more work keeping them in check. You'll begin by deciding what kind of tree you want to grow. This may be a little bit complicated as most fruit trees must be cross-pollinated, which requires at least one tree of a different variety located within 50 feet, as you see here. If you've got the room, you might not mind this. Not all of them are cross-pollinators. Look for self-pollinators, like this nectarine, unless you're happy with training more than one espalier of the same variety in your garden. There are multi-budded fruit trees which are available. Each branch has a different variety growing on it. However, some limbs will grow more readily than others, and you'll need to stay on top of pruning to ensure one variety doesn't overtake the rest. You can see a weaker limb on this tree. Note the branch on the lower left. It's much shorter than the others. And are the conditions right for the type of tree you want to plant? Warmer climates may not have a cool enough winter for apples, as an example, while cooler climates may find it difficult to grow some forms of citrus. Check with your local master gardeners to find the best varieties for your area. A one-year-old tree is usually best to begin with, as younger trees are easiest to train. They're more supple for one. Look for one about the diameter of your thumb. Examples of one-year-old trees are on the left. On the right is a nursery-trained espalier, which is also an option. In midwinter, when you're picking out your one-year-old tree, called a whip, to start your espalier, you can usually pick the available whips up out of the soft mulching material they are displayed in at a nursery to check out the condition of the roots. Better ask first to be sure it's okay to lift up the whip at your particular nursery. Look for a good flare of the roots. You don't want to deal with a plant with roots growing mostly down and not out, or with roots that are pot-bound or girdling. In order to get a consistent fruit flavor and size, a cutting from a successful fruit tree is grafted onto the rootstock from another tree, and in the case of espalier plants, you want that rootstock to be from a dwarf variety. The upper part of the combined plant is called the scion, while the lower part is called the rootstock. Make sure you leave the graft union exposed 2 to 4 inches above the soil. There are 2 labels on each whip you'll find in the nursery that note the variety and the rootstock. Here you see labels for a Fuji apple with an M111 rootstock, which is a semi-dwarf. You want to make sure the rootstock is from a dwarf or a semi-dwarf variety when you're planning on espaliering your plant. Otherwise, the plant will be too vigorous to keep within your chosen espalier style. If you're looking for self-pollinators, pear trees are self-pollinating, so that you can get a good yield of fruit from just a single tree. You can plant just one pear tree and have it bear you fruit for years without having any other tree nearby for cross-pollination. However, there are several varieties of pear trees that are not self-pollinating, so check with your nursery before you buy. According to some experts, peach trees, most varieties anyway, are truly self-pollinating, and so long as you prune the tree beneficially, you'll be able to get a good yield of large, edible fruit as opposed to small fruit. You want to remove excess fruit so that you'll have plenty of fruit, but it's not too crowded. Having fewer fruit generally produces larger fruit. Nectarines are similar to peaches and often substituted for them. They too pollinate on their own. Apricot trees are also a good choice for self-pollinating trees. 2 exceptions are Perfection and Ryland varieties of apricots. These are not self-fruitful and will require cross-pollination. Check with your nursery before you buy. Location is key. Fruit trees are full sun dwellers, and most are going to want sun year-round, even if they go dormant in the winter months. You will need about 8 feet of linear space in a well-drained spot that gets full sun. Full sun means the tree will receive at least 6 hours of light per day. A south-facing orientation is best. South-facing trees have the benefit of more sunlight during the winter months, enabling them to stay warm even if it gets cold out. Putting your tree against a wall will also help protect from chillier conditions, as mentioned earlier. Keep the trees 6 to 12 inches away from the walls. Avoid western exposure for sensitive species like persimmons or cherries. And don't plant your espalier tree near large trees, as their shade and roots could invade the space if too close. Depending on the type of espalier you're doing, you need to create a support mechanism, and they vary. This one consists of redwood posts sunk in concrete with 12-gauge wire stretched between them. Use rot-resistant wood, such as cypress, cedar, redwood, or pressure-treated wood for the posts. Sink the 4x4 posts in concrete about 24 inches deep, with the top of the concrete a bit above ground. Use heavy gauge wire, 12 to 14 gauge, and a screw and eye lag bolt at one end of your wire, and a turnbuckle at the other end of your wire. Direct the shoot of your young tree along the wires strung between posts. Use flexible ties or jute to tie the young branches to the wires after the first summer. The young branches will grow faster if they are left to grow a bit upright. When they're put horizontally along the wires, it slows them down, slows their growth down a bit. That's why you wait until the end of the first summer to actually tie them onto the wire. As you can see, the posts should be at least 8 feet apart or more if that's the intent of your design. Plant the whip so the shoulders of the roots show at ground level. and the graft sign is about 3 to 4 inches above soil level. Mulch well with compost, make it about 3 inches deep, and follow with a cover of wood chips. This diagram shows the basics of creating a cordon style design. In image 1, you plant your dormant whip midwinter and cut it down to about 15 to 18 inches in height. That's about knee high. Leave at least 3 buds under your cut. These will become the first rungs of your cordon. Shown in image 2, the first summer, you'll let those shoots and any others that happen to pop out grow and lengthen into small branches. Image number 3 now. At the end of summer into fall, choose the 3 best shoots that are evenly spaced around the whip and about an inch or so from each other. Cut off any of the other shoots. Tie 2 of the shoots along the first wire and let the third shoot grow upward. Image number 4 shows the second winter dormancy after that first summer. Head the plant back to the second wire rung, again leaving 3 good buds below the cut to be trained next spring and summer. It takes at least 4 years to get an espalier with 4 rungs to it. You'll repeat steps 2 through 4 until you reach the number of rungs you're happy with. You will encourage fruiting spurs when you cut back each year's growth to 3 buds. The bottom image shows that the first year bud eventually turned into a fruiting spur. Once your espalier has reached the desired shape, most of the pruning can be done during spring and summer, with some touch-up in the winter. If you don't keep cutting back to 3 spurs on the current year's growth, you'll end up with vigorous shoots like these with very few fruiting spurs. Pruning should be done at least twice during the year, in early spring and summer, and possibly during the dormant season. Don't let it get away from you, or you'll get a look like this. Notice on the right photo, there are only a few apples on the tree, and they are quite a ways up, difficult to pick. Most of the branches are quite vertical with no fruit. Spring and summer pruning should be done to remove vigorous shoots and cut back to 3 buds, protecting any spurs. Slant your cuts towards the bud to let rain run off the cut surface. Cut so the top edge of the cut is above the bud and the bottom edge is level with the bud base. The photo on the right shows lots of fruiting spurs along the branch. Be sure not to cut these off. Fruiting spurs will look more swollen than foliage buds, which are a bit more pointed. To avoid summer burn, paint the exposed bark with a solution of white latex paint and water in equal quantities. Do this before any burning occurs. The tree can compartmentalize any burned areas, but it still damages the tree. You can see the results of summer pruning here on a cherry tree that's a few years old. And here it is again, a couple of years later. So to recap, plan your pattern. Espalier comes in all kinds of different varieties of patterns. Fruit trees grow really well with the horizontal form, the cordon style. Or if space is at a premium, you can use a pattern where the branches are turned up, as in this Palmette Verrier. If there's a long fence that needs to be covered, you might think about using the Belgian fence design. As far as location goes, any solid wall will do, as long as there's enough light for the plant you want and room to plant. You can also use a container, provided it's large enough to hold the plant when it's mature. When choosing your plants, remember the self-pollinators, and also that apple and pear are probably the easiest to espalier. Then you'll need to prepare your support structure. Some posts with wires running in between, heavy gauge wire for 12 to 14 gauge. Plant the tree or shrub and the structure that will support it about a foot in front of a south-facing wall, keeping the scion graft point 3 to 4 inches above the soil level. The first winter, cut the new whip to about 18 inches, leaving 3 buds. Let those buds grow that first summer. Train 2 of the small emerging buds along the wire with soft ties and let the third grow straight up. Cut off any extras. The second winter, when the trunk reaches the next wire up, allow 2 side shoots to develop and attach them to the wires. Let a third shoot grow upward to your next level. Cut off any extras. You will repeat this process until you reach the number of rungs you desire. Well, Janice and I hope that you got some new information out of this PowerPoint lecture. We certainly learned a lot from putting it all together, and I hope you've gotten enough to whet your appetite for going out there and planting your own espalier.
We're back.
We're back. All right, I see that we have a few questions in the chat, and I know Dana was answering some of them during the presentation. So we'll do some of, we'll start at the top. Robin has asked, my 2 Camis espalier pears are 5 to 6 years old and have only bloomed sparsely last 2 years. I learned that they are self-sterile. So I have since last year another pair that will pollinate them. It has bloomed this year and even set fruit. Any suggestions on getting more bloom from Camis? I'm sorry, I don't know this word. Camis, or are they just slow?
Well, you can actually help the pollination by taking some of the blossoms from the tree that is the pollinator tree and sort of touching the blossoms of the ones that need to be pollinated. But did you mean that they were self-pollinating or not? Because that's the term that we usually use, self-pollinating or not self-pollinating. And if it's not self-pollinating, then yes, you need another tree. You need to make sure it's the right variety for that tree, that variety that you have, because they use, some don't work. Depends on the variety you've got, and check with the nursery for that. Or
yeah, I noticed later Robin wrote this like really early in the presentation, and I noticed later on in the video that you guys talked about the self-pollinating trees. So
yeah. And yeah, also they do need to be pruned. I mean, if you haven't pruned it for years, that can also slow down the amount of fruiting that you get. So yeah, they need to be pruned summer and winter usually.
You need to make sure that the location of your trees has enough nutrients in the soil. They won't fruit a lot if you don't have good nutrients. There are products that you can add to the soil that will help your trees bloom and flower.
okay, thank you. Lauren has asked, do people concern themselves with doing an espalier against homes vis-a-vis fire? Seems that espalier on walls of houses might be too much of a fire hazard.
Yeah, good question. Absolutely. Around here, you don't want to do that. It does get done against walls, but I would say that's more like back east or in some other area that doesn't have the fire hazard that we have. I don't think you could do it against a house here. They tell you to take it down. Anything else?
Norman's asked about Meyer lemon leaves on one side of the new espalier being chomped off. Is this a snail issue? Is there a spray? What do you two think?
So for any pest, it's always a good idea to go to the Marin County site and look at the IPM suggestions. They're scientifically based and come from the university. So that's one resource for all gardeners, in Marin or not. But you may need to make sure you identify what it is, looking around the plant. And there's the help desk as well. You can email questions to our help desk or actually take in a leaf and ask them to identify what it is. If there's snails, there's many home remedies that are suggested. Coffee grounds, using a copper band around the container or close to the plant, because snails don't like copper. Broken eggshells and other home remedies sometimes work as well, but also picking off the insects and inspecting your plant often can help.
Thank you. Susan has asked, can espalier trees be grown in containers? And if so, what is the ideal size for the container?
They can be grown in containers, and you have to, it depends on the tree, the species. You have to think in terms of what the adult height and what the adult size of the tree is, and then you've got to get a container that's large enough to handle that root system. So it's going to be somewhere around 10 gallon. But for the nursery.
One thing with espalier is you have to have lots of patience. Dana and I both have espalier trees in our yard, and Dana's are more artistic than mine because I don't have the patience that Dana does. So time is important. It takes years to really establish a full-grown espalier tree. And mine are now approaching their second year. So it's hard sometimes to cut them back as needed to create the art. So for all of you that are new to it, be prepared to be patient and let time help the tree form and develop as your artistic eye would wish, because sometimes the plant doesn't conform to what you desire. And so you have to be patient and wait for buds to break.
Okay, thank you. Josh has asked, if we have some existing trees that are a couple of years old, can we convert them into espalier?
Yeah, you can do that. It's better to start one from scratch because you get a stronger structure. But you can take a tree that's already, especially if it's only 2 years old, that already exists, that has branches coming off. If they've got branches coming off in about the locations that you'd want your different tiers to be, yeah, it can be done.
Thank you. Lauren has asked, can one use a chain link fence as support?
Yeah, as long as you're sure that chain link fence is going to be there forever and it's really sturdy, because the trees, the plants get heavy and strong as they get older. So I have never done it on a chain link fence myself. I've always created something in front of it. You have more control of it that way too.
And you need to make sure that your neighbor, if there's a neighbor on the other side of that fence, is okay with it, in that it's going to poke through. And so you're going to want access to the other side to prune.
Thank you. Christina has asked, does the apple tree need to get 6 hours of sun year round or just summer? Okay, want to try with one where house blocks sun in the winter.
I would say that come spring, it would need to get 6 hours of sun. Spring, summer, fall. Yeah. Winter, probably not so much because it's dormant at that point. So the tree's sleeping. But yeah, once it starts getting leaves and it starts pulling in the sun, you need to have good sun coverage.
And many varieties really need more than 6 hours.
Mhm.
So you might get less production and less growth if you only have 6 hours.
Yeah, I'd say most of them, it's between 6 and 8, but being on the 8 side, they need a lot of sun.
Okay, thank you. Lise has asked, I purchased a pre-espaliered Fuji apple, but want additional cordon runs above. There are no shoots near the trunk of the topmost current run. Is there any way to encourage shoots near the top of it, near the trunk on the top, e.g. cut topmost cordons?
So I'm guessing that you want to add another tier to your tree. And yeah, you can take some of the branches. You've got the branches coming off like this on both sides. And if you get some that are growing really close to where that stem comes up, you could just train one of those up and it can become the next layer, the trunk for the next layer.
So the next question is from Zoom user. They'd like to watch the PowerPoint again. I am recording this, and I will send out the recording tomorrow to everyone who registered. So you'll be able to watch the recording again once I send out that link. And then Robin, I think Robin has another question following up on the pear trees, the first question we answered. Robin says that they do prune them during the summer and sometimes in the winter. They're the trees are south facing, and Robin just doesn't have too much foliage. That was her response.
Too much foliage. Yeah, you're probably just not pruning it enough. I mean, they do require pruning. You just have to get in there and cut the stuff away that you're just not going to, it's not fruiting, so that you've got minimal number of branches coming up and they're fairly short. And it will get bushy during the summer, but then during the winter you trim it back.
Well, Robin was saying that they do prune them. So.
Well, that's all you can do, prune them.
Okay,
yeah.
It's just pruning. Okay.
And sometimes you can't make small cuts. Sometimes you have to make bigger cuts and go back to the main branch, either the horizontal or the vertical, and make bigger cuts.
Norman has asked for other suggestions for more. He is asking to please suggest other materials for wires and what to hold branches there. Does that make sense?
I've just used the 14 gauge wire. That's what I've used across, and then held it in place by the turnbuckles, and yeah.
And I've used the same system. So you can either build it yourself or hire someone to build it for you. But it's pretty much, it has to be really strong to hold the tree.
You could have a metal frame; it would work fine. But it does have to be really sturdy, the frame.
All right, so Lisa's following up with her original question about horizontal cordons. There are no buds or shoots near the trunk. That's the problem. Is there a way to encourage the apple to send out buds and shoots near the trunk of that topmost cordon so that she can add more cordons on top?
There are ways of doing it, but nothing that I'm very versed in, because I've never forced it before. But I know that you can sometimes make a slice above a bud, and it will cause the energy to sort of stop at that bud, a latent bud, but one that's not fruiting or sprouting at the moment. But I wouldn't try it myself because I haven't really done it. I'd probably have somebody that's done that before come help me with it. Okay. Eventually it probably will sprout something that's closer to the trunk.
Jane has two questions. Can you espalier pomegranate trees, and when and where do you fertilize the trees? Oh, sorry, when and with what do you fertilize the trees? Sorry.
Okay, now, we're probably both going to have something to say here because this is a big issue. So I don't really fertilize, quote unquote, my tree. I put compost on top of the soil, and then I put mulch on top of that. The key to having a really strong tree is to make sure that the soil is really healthy. And the way that we make sure the soil is really healthy is that you keep adding compost and um, a layer of something on top of that to keep the soil moist and to feed the soil so you get lots of worms in there and so that the biology of the soil stays good. And nature takes care of it.
And I'm just going to echo Dana's advice. Some people do use commercial products, but I have noticed in practice that causes growth spurts and isn't as natural as improving your soil. So to improve your soil, you do want to use quality compost and mulch. It's the best for the soil, and that helps growth.
Another benefit of that is that if you've got really good soil there and nutrients going up into the tree, that the tree itself is strong enough to fight off various insects that come along. So you'll have better luck with insect control as well.
And part of her question is, when do you fertilize? Is there a good time to do this compost and mulch thing?
I just do it periodically. When it starts getting thin on the ground, I'll just put more on because you want to have, I'd say, a good 3 inches of compost or so, 2 to 3 inches, and then mulch on top of that, a couple of inches. So and then it slowly deteriorates and goes away, and you add more.
And then her first question was, can you espalier pomegranate trees?
Yes, you can.
Yes. Okay.
They're kind of brittle, but you can do it, especially if you start young.
Okay, so we're almost on our time. So there's 2 more questions in the Q&A, and then that'll be it for the questions. For anyone who did not get a chance to type in a question, you can contact the help desk. I will send that information out in tomorrow's email with the link to the recording. Mary has asked, spring pruning months in general, summer pruning months in general, both times 3 nodes from basal nodes.
Okay, so I prune mine in the winter in order to get the structure of the tree the way that I want it. So because you don't have any leaves there, so you can see how the branches are formed, and I can get rid of something that I don't want, and I can also make something that I do want shorter. If you make it shorter, you're going to get fatter. So I like having sort of fat branches coming up off of my main trunk. So I tend to leave my branches like 4 or 5 inches in height only. I clip them each winter, and I prune it. Then I do not prune it during the spring at all because it's putting energy out to get its leaves going and its buds for the fruit, and I don't want it to have to heal a cut at the same time that it's trying to put energy into the fruit and leaf growth. So I wait until after it's fruited. And then after it's fruited in sort of late summer, I might cut it as well to get some of those branches that are really tall and shading things down a little lower. You have anything to add, Janice?
I agree. In the hard winter, it's the best to do your structural cuts, and that's the way to get the structure to firm up and to get thick. And that's part of the beauty of the Espalier style, is to see those the older looking structure of the tree.
Great, thank you. So our last question is from Lisa again. She's been talking about the cordon trees, the pre-espalier tree she had. She's asking if you can repeat the part about pruning and leaving 3 buds. She did not quite get that.
Okay. So when you get a new whip, it's about the diameter of your thumb. That's what you're getting from a nursery, and you do that in the winter when there are no leaves on the tree, and you can see the roots. Get a bare root one, and they sell them in the middle of winter, at various nurseries, all over the place. So check the root system. You bring it home and you cut that whip. It's usually about 5 feet tall. You cut it down so it's about knee height, and it will then sprout some. And when spring comes, it will then sprout buds. And you want to make sure that you leave at least 3 at the top of this long stick. 2 of them. So here's the long stick. So a bud that's right about here and a bud that's right about here, you're going to eventually train to stay along the wire. Then there should be another bud that's coming off of either the back or the front or right near there. There's one other bud that one's going to go straight up, and it will make the next layer, the next tier, the following summer. And you just keep doing that until you've got as many tiers as you want.
So you look on the whip for swellings that are the potential buds, and then you're going to try to find it around 18 inches tall and cut it there. And then that's what's going to swell and open and be your new branches. And Dana's really good at chopping their heads off. For me, it's really difficult to cut them off, but you have to do it to do this style of tree. You have to be kind of heartless and make those cuts so that you can get the espalier form.
And that was really a good point that I missed on mine. You do have to look for those buds, the faint look of a bud on the whip itself, so that you do get kind of near 3 of them when you cut.
Alrighty, gonna stop the recording. Thank you all, YouTube land.